Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's great to be with you. Let's see here. Oops. It looks like we have a good number and we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Milo Hoskow. I'm the Director of Partner Experience at Inquire Ed. And in that role, I work with a lot of our partner districts and schools as they implement our inquiry-based social studies curriculum. So I've given a lot of thought to supporting teachers in this work. And I'm really excited to share some of our thinking around differentiation in the inquiry classroom. So without further ado, we're going to jump into this work together. So in order to orient ourselves to the session and kind of set our intentions, I'd ask for you all just in your mind to think back to a recent time you differentiated for a student or group of students, or maybe you supported someone in this work, and just think back to what was the task, what was the need for the support, and how did you adjust the learning experience for that student? So we're just going to kind of go back to a moment where we did this as educators. Okay, now that we're back in that space of thinking about differentiation for students, providing support or stretch for students given their need, we're going to jump into our goals for today. So our first goal is to establish a shared definition of differentiation and explore the components of differentiation. Then we're going to identify differentiated supports within inquiry-based lessons. And then we're going to apply tools to further differentiate and support and think about how we can apply. We'll do this within model lessons, but then also think about how we can do this in our own settings with any curricula. So here's a definition of differentiation. Differentiation is differentiation is a way of teaching. It's not a program or a package of worksheets. It asks the teacher to know their students well so they can provide each one with experiences and tasks that will improve the learning. And I love this quote. This means teachers proactively plan varied approaches to what students need to learn, how they will learn it, and/or how they will show what they have learned in order to increase the likelihood that each student will learn as much as he or she can and as efficiently as possible. From Carol and Tom.
My camera's on.
So with that in mind, I just want to emphasize that this is about the access to learning. Differentiation is not about just making things easier for students or adding more work for kids who need stretch. It's about access and depth and varying students' ways to engage and demonstrate learning. And I'm feeling lucky to be the last presenter of this workshop, because even though we all might be a little bit tired and we've done a lot of work and all of that, but we've been thinking about inquiry now for 2 days. And what's lovely about that is inquiry design and the components of differentiation have a lot of overlaps that provide opportunities for stretch and support. So some examples of this are varied levels of questions and answers that students can engage with and respond with. Repeated and varied exposures to content and concepts. We're not just learning through one mode, it's multimodal. Opportunities for collaboration as well as independent work. Students thrive in different ways in different settings. And varied assessments. Students demonstrating their learning in a range of ways, allowing students with differing interests, abilities to demonstrate what they've learned throughout the inquiry. Now, that said, I think these are things that provide both stretch and support for students, but we know through our support of teachers using inquiry-based social studies lessons, teachers really feel like they need support for them with supporting their students. So we're going to be focused for the rest of this session more on the scaffolds and supports for students rather than the stretch opportunities. I also want to say that while inquiry has all these overlaps that provide opportunities for differentiation, I want to acknowledge that inquiry presents potentially new challenges to students that weren't there in maybe a way more traditional class setting. So for example, collaboration, student choice, these are things that might present challenges for students in some ways, and we need to think about how we support now that these are introduced to our classroom setting. So we're going to start our work by exploring the components of differentiation. And we are going to think about these 5 components: content, process, assessment, affect, and environment. And the way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask you to navigate to your hub for this session, which should look like this. And the first item here in your differentiation toolbox is the components of differentiation. So I'd like to ask everyone to go ahead and open that up. And once you're in there, maybe I can stay on this slide just so everyone sees where we're going. We're going right here where it says components of differentiation. Once you are in that document, I would ask you to take a few minutes to explore this document, to read it. And if you don't have time to read the whole thing, that's okay, because the structure of each section will stay the same, and you'll come back to it multiple times in this session. So just go ahead and read some of the components, and I'll be quiet so you can read. Okay, kind of wrap up the section that you're on and come back together. So what I love about this document that outlines the 5 components of differentiation is when I was in the classroom and something was hard, initially I would think of the task. I thought, my students are struggling with reading. They are having a hard time with this complex task. And I think about, how do I adjust the task itself instead of backing up and saying, what about this task is challenging to my students, and realizing that that could be different for different students. So thinking about, is reading this complex task challenging to my students because of process? There's just too much on a page and it would benefit my students to chunk it. Or is reading this complex task challenging to a student because of content? Is it because my students don't have the background knowledge to make this reading sticky, to give them the schema to understand it? So instead of just thinking of the task itself, thinking about those components of differentiation with the task allowed me to think more clearly about how I would support any given student. So now that we've explored this document, we're going to do a lesson exploration, and I'm going to show you where to find this lesson in a moment. But what you're going to do is you're going to choose any lesson from our sample lesson dropdown. And I want you to take a moment to orient yourself to this lesson. You're going to read the lesson descriptions, and you're going to read the lesson objectives, and it's represented as student will be able to. And then investigate the active inquiry section of that lesson. And you're going to say, you're going to ask yourself, what is the learning task? What is the learner support? And which component of differentiation is that support aligned to? So let me show you how you're going to get to this, and then I'll come back to this slide. So from your hub for this session, you're going to go to the lesson selector. And I believe you saw the same bank of lessons in some earlier sessions. So you might want to stick with a lesson that's familiar to you just for ease of doing this work. But if you want to explore another lesson, you can. So here are a range of lessons you can choose. Once you choose a lesson, you get to this kind of orientation page. And I think you can kind of skip over that as long as you recognize that these lessons are embedded in a sustained inquiry. And you're going to click Go to Lesson. And so your challenge is to read quickly this overview of the lesson. And then as you scroll down, the students will be able to. And then let's get way down here into the active inquiry. Read what the learning task is and expand. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. My apologies. You're going to read what the learning task is, and you're going to find this learner support, which is in a bubble, and think about what is that learner support? Which component of differentiation is being leveraged in this particular learner support? So we're going to take some time to do this exploration individually, and then I'm going to have you go into breakout rooms and share your findings. So you're going to share everything that is on this slide. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do this work independently, and then I'll send you to breakout rooms. So let's just take about 5 minutes to choose a lesson and do this exploration. Okay, I'm going to bring us back together, and hopefully you have a sense of your lesson that you explored and the main task of the active inquiry and the learner support that was there. So now we're going to go into small groups. And we're going to share out our findings. You're going to say which lesson you explored, what was the learning task, what was the learning support, and what component of differentiation that learning support aligned to. And we're doing this to set like a little shared understanding, because you're going to work with this breakout room throughout the rest of the session. And when you're in the breakout room, again, we're going to ask you to be mics on, cameras on, working together. So the first thing we're going to do is go into the breakout room and have each person share out what you discovered in this quick lesson exploration, applying the differentiation strategies to the learner support. And I do want to just show one thing. I know when you go into breakout rooms, it can be a little frustrating because you don't have the slide that is telling you what you are going to be doing in the breakout room. So if you come back to the hub where you see me and my cursor right now, there is a link to breakout room visual supports. And so each time we go into a breakout room, you can find the slide that I just showed you in the main session to remind you of what is the breakout room task. So back to our session here. Ashley, if you can put folks into groups of about 4, and when you're in your group, share out which is your lesson, what lesson did you explore, what was the learning task, and what was the learner support, and what component of differentiation did it align to. And you will have about 5 minutes for this share out. All right, it looks like we have everybody coming back now, being zoomed back through the magic of technology. And I would love to provide an opportunity to share a little bit of cross group here. So if you could take a minute in the chat to note which components of differentiation you thought were leveraged in the learner supports your group shared out. And just go ahead and let us know if you're seeing a lot of process, a lot of content. A lot of process here. And in some case, extending the learning, absolutely. Affect, there was an example of affect. Yeah, some folks, oftentimes when you read about the components of differentiation, you see affect and environment being kind of lumped together, which I think is fine. I like to tease them apart because they feel different to me when I think about the moves I'm gonna make. Great, thank you for sharing. We're gonna dig a little deeper now and go a little further into these lessons. So now you and your group, you've established kind of a shared understanding of the different lessons. And maybe you're looking at similar lessons, maybe you're looking at different lessons. Now we're going to start analyzing these lessons more deeply to think about how are they already differentiated beyond the learner support? Because remember, we talked about that Venn diagram between inquiry, design, and the components of differentiation. So what examples can you see of like differentiation embedded in the lesson plan itself? Then we're going to talk about, well, what's missing, what still might be challenging. That's the next step. And then we're going to look for moves we can make as teachers and tools we could use to make those moves, as that's where we're going in this session. But let's just come back here to this first one of the lesson application. So your challenge here is to identify ways that inquiry-based lessons can be designed to leverage the components of differentiation. So now you're reading not the learner support, but the active inquiry lesson plan. And you're going to look for ways that this lesson allows for differentiated access for students. And anytime you see an example of that, you're going to work on a Jamboard with your, you're going to work on a Jamboard. You're going to place a sticky note in the column related to that component of differentiation. I'm going to show you this Jamboard in 1 second. Then once everyone's had a little time to do this, and I will broadcast to the groups when after the independent work time, you're going to share out and you're going to say, what are you seeing as other ways, other components of differentiation that are just embedded in the instruction here, because this is an inquiry designed lesson. So let me show you quickly the Jamboard. Your Jamboard will look like this. And as you're identifying places where you are already seeing examples of differentiation in the lesson design, you're going to put a yellow sticky note in the column where it aligns to the component of differentiation. So, Ashley, we are about to send people back into their breakout rooms to do this. All right, it's good to see you guys back. Nice to see some faces. And so I hope that process allowed you to dig a little deeper into the lesson and look for those overlaps between components of differentiation and inquiry-based design. But I want to acknowledge that it doesn't mean that students won't need support with the lesson as designed. And that's the new lens we're going to take to this. So in a moment, I'm going to send you back to your groups and you're going to do another about 2 minutes of independent investigation and then go back to discussing. And someone just told me the activity was rushed and I am willing to take more time. That means that it was engaging and there was work to do. So we'll extend this a little bit. We're going to take about 3 minutes for the independent piece of this. And then let's go ahead and take like 4 minutes just to share out a little bit where you find students would still need support with this lesson. So this time you're going to use a red sticky note. So red sticky note is going to identify, okay, this isn't a slam dunk here. I need to do some support for my students. So you're going to take a red sticky note and you're going to describe a learner task that you think would need further support for a student you have in mind. And keep in mind, you are supporting many, many different students. So you might find different opportunities to support students in different ways. And so again, you're going to put what that task in the column where you think you could leverage that component of differentiation the best. So, you know, if it's a complex reading task, are you thinking, I think I'd like to differentiate for content or process? Go ahead and put that post-it where you think you might leverage the components of differentiation. And then you're going to share out with your group. And we're doing pretty well with our time. So I'm happy to give this a little more time and I really appreciate the feedback. And so back to our breakout rooms. Welcome back. I love seeing everyone use all their breakout room time. I hope you had enough time to do the work and be engaged in discussion, but it seems like it's been a fruitful discussion. So I love that. So we identified where even though this is an inquiry-based lesson, even though there's a learner support, there are still parts of this lesson where students you have in your mind might need added support. So I'd love for you just to throw in the chat, what are some of those things? What are some of the tasks where students would need extra support? And I'm seeing solutions, closed caption videos, reading aloud, differentiated tasks, decoding, chunking content. So I'm seeing people already going into their differentiation supports, not just the task that's hard. But I want to give you some resources to add into this toolbox. I love this. I'm seeing so many tools in your differentiation toolbox already coming through this chat, but now we're going to dig a little further. And in the interest of time, we're going to do this as independent work. So, and then we're going to share out in the chat. So if you go to your differentiation session hub, next in your toolbox are 5 different learner support guides, and they're all related around different tasks or types of tasks. And so I want you to think of those things that were challenging, and I want you to dig into start exploring these learner support guides, and they have suggestions for example, we have reading complex text is a robust guide. It even has guides within the guide, but start digging through that, or another guide that seems more relevant to the section of the lesson that you said this still needs further support, and start seeing if there are other supports that you might provide a student other than what already came to mind. So we're going to take about 7 minutes to let you dig into these guides. And you can go ahead and put a blue Post-it on your Jamboard anytime you found a support that isn't one that you had already thought of, but might still support that red or sticky task that students might need more support with. So this is independent work time. Go ahead and explore the guides, dig into them, and then we'll have a share out at the end. So this is where we're looking now. And anytime you find a support, throw it on your Jamboard. And I love to see these in blue so that we can see like, this is a new idea. All right. I want to give us an opportunity to share out in the chat. I'd love to hear if there was a strategy for differentiation that you came across that was maybe helpful or new to you, or you hadn't thought of just in this circumstance yet. And go ahead and put in the chat something that struck a chord with you that you might use, and share out with the group. Thank you, Manny. The basics of executive functioning are great for teachers who are nervous to allow for group work and collaboration. Yeah, inquiry, like all of a sudden we're wondering, can my kids do this? Can they manage themselves in this more complex setting? And so the executive functioning guide is incredibly helpful. The reading complex text guide has so many strategies in there, and really think about what can you do before the text, during the text, and after the text. It's great to have just this toolbox of strategies for when things get challenging. You don't always know how you're going to need to differentiate when your class is new to you, but as you get to know your kids, now you have a toolbox you can get to. The power of generating questions is really helpful when it comes to accessing content. And then I see assigning roles or having students self-assign. That can be really helpful in the collaborative work and also for that executive functioning piece. Lots of think aloud strategies in there. Excellent. Well, this is really wonderful. I want to give us a few moments before the session ends to kind of just share back to me like what you took away from this session. So Ashley is going to put into the chat a Google form, and it's this exit ticket. And this is the exit ticket for this session. I know Martin's going to come back on and just gather your feedback about the entire conference. But in terms of reflecting on the differentiation session, I'd love to have you share out in this form that Ashley's about to drop here. There it is. Just your responses to, when it comes to differentiation, I used to think, and now I think. And perhaps your thinking is deeper, perhaps it's changed, perhaps it's stayed the same. All of that would be really interesting for me to see and helpful feedback. And with that, when you're done with that, I know Martin wants to come back and close out the conference. So I just want to thank you. We did a lot of small group work, and I hope it was fruitful and engaging, and you had a chance to collaborate with other folks from across the country thinking about differentiation in the inquiry classroom.